Hollywood has always sold us perfection, but some of its greatest stars were anything but perfect. From concealed injuries to visible differences that became trademarks, these Golden Age legends proved that true talent shines brightest when it overcomes the impossible. Montgomery Clift. In the mid-1950s, Montgomery Clift was Hollywood's magnetic golden boy until one night changed everything. On May 12, 1956, Clift's car struck a telephone pole after leaving Elizabeth Taylor's Beverly Hills home. The collision shattered his nose and jaw, caused nerve damage leading to partial facial paralysis, and permanently altered the left side of his face. Taylor, arriving shortly after, reportedly stopped others from moving him, fearing it might worsen his injuries. Stories persist about her helping clear his airway, dramatic as any scene they shared on screen. Their friendship deepened after the accident, with Taylor becoming one of the few people who truly understood Clift's private struggles, offering unconditional support during his darkest periods. Clift returned to complete Raintree County, which had begun filming before the crash. The production crew used strategic lighting, makeup, and camera angles to mask the changes, but the contrast between before and after footage remains noticeable. The film debuted in December 1957, and audiences couldn't look away. Hollywood, built on image, seemed unsure how to handle Clift's altered appearance. Roles became scarce. Meanwhile, his reliance on alcohol and prescription medication escalated, compounded by chronic pain and deepening emotional struggles. The accident became a metaphor for Clift's internal battles, the external changes visible to all, while his deeper wounds remained hidden from a world that demanded perfection. Yet critics argue the trauma sparked new depth in his performances. In Judgment at Nuremberg from 1961, his portrayal of a traumatized witness earned widespread acclaim. The New York Times called it achingly honest. Film scholars have speculated whether the accident, while devastating, stripped away Hollywood polish to expose a more vulnerable Clift. Others suggest the industry simply didn't know how to accommodate a leading performer whose face no longer matched their ideal. Either way, Clift's legacy became inseparable from both the talent and the challenges that followed him to the screen. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi's haunting presence in Dracula, stoic, statuesque, and deliberate, became the prototype for cinematic vampires. Yet behind the theatrical glamour was someone grappling with chronic pain. Lugosi wrestled with severe sciatica and back trouble, ailments that worsened in the late 1940s and into the 50s. Though some enthusiasts suspect his famously rigid movements in Dracula came from physical distress, many film historians credit his style to theatrical methods from his early career in Hungary. Yet rumors persist that the flowing cape served more than spectacle. It may have helped conceal stiffness during lengthy shoots. By the early 1950s, Lugosi's health woes were magnified by growing reliance on morphine, initially prescribed for pain relief. Alternative medications followed, not as painkillers, but as part of his rehabilitation efforts. His public image suffered, but the larger setback emerged from Hollywood itself, where shifting tastes and persistent typecasting left him on the sidelines. In April 1955, at age 72, Lugosi made headlines with his voluntary entry into rehabilitation, one of the earliest instances of a major star confronting addiction publicly. His decision to seek help was particularly brave, given the era's attitudes toward mental health and dependency, when such admissions could permanently destroy careers. The press covered the story extensively, and while certain quotes attributed to him may lean more toward legend than fact, his choice signaled a rare moment of openness in a business rooted in make-believe. In his final year, Lugosi lived in a humble apartment, sustained by the charity of friends and fans who remembered his contributions to cinema when Hollywood had largely forgotten him. Despite fewer opportunities and ongoing health complications, Lugosi remained a cultural force until his passing on August 16, 1956, at age 73. His legacy lives on not just as a horror icon, but as someone whose physical and personal struggles reflected the complex realities behind old Hollywood's glamorous facade. Lionel Barrymore. By the mid-1930s, Lionel Barrymore, an Oscar-winning actor and patriarch of one of Hollywood's most famous dynasties, was facing a harsh reality off-screen. Coming from a theatrical family, where Drew Barrymore would later continue the legacy, Lionel understood that the Barrymore name carried both privilege and crushing expectations to maintain the family's artistic reputation. Chronic arthritis, compounded by multiple hip injuries, had severely limited his mobility. After fracturing his hip twice, Barrymore began using a wheelchair permanently. But, in a business obsessed with physical perfection, he stayed on camera and not in minor roles. Rather than sideline him, MGM kept Barrymore under contract, integrating his condition into his characters. Most notably, his portrayal of Dr. Gillespie in the long-running Dr. Kildare film series made his wheelchair use part of the character, an unusual move in an era when physical differences were often hidden or edited out entirely. Barrymore's determination to continue working despite his condition inspired other performers facing similar challenges, proving that talent could transcend physical limitations, even in an industry obsessed with image. His performance as Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life in 1946 is another standout. He delivered the entire role seated, with no explanation needed for the character's mobility situation. What's clear is that directors framed scenes carefully to keep attention on his face and voice, still commanding despite his declining health. Whispers have persisted that Barrymore relied on strong medications to manage the pain, and some biographers mention the use of leg braces during earlier stages of his condition. But Barrymore himself rarely discussed his health publicly. That silence was typical of the time. Studios were known to suppress anything that might tarnish a star's image, and physical limitations didn't align with the standard heroic lead. Yet, Barrymore's continued presence on screen, despite his condition, quietly challenged the industry's unwritten rules. In a town built on illusion, he didn't hide, he adapted, and audiences, perhaps unknowingly, accepted a performer with physical challenges in a prominent role long before representation was part of the conversation. Harold Lloyd. On August 24, 1919, Harold Lloyd was posing for a publicity photo when a supposed prop bomb exploded in his hand, taking his right thumb and index finger and leaving him temporarily blind. At the time, Lloyd was one of Hollywood's fastest-rising silent film stars. Known for his daring stunts and signature glasses, the injury could have ended everything. Instead, it became Hollywood's best-kept secret. Lloyd wore a specially designed glove with prosthetic fingers, so convincing that most audiences and even fellow actors never noticed. The prosthetic device was revolutionary for its time, created through the combined efforts of producer Sam Goldwyn, a former glove salesman, and Hal Roach, who understood that Lloyd's career depended on maintaining the illusion of physical completeness. He returned to the screen less than a year later, doubling down on physical comedy and jaw-dropping stunts. In 1923's Safety Last, he famously clung to the edge of a skyscraper clock with what looked like both hands. Behind the scenes, only one was fully functional. Lloyd's commitment to his craft was so complete that he spent months learning to write with his left hand, becoming essentially ambidextrous through intensive training. Hollywood rarely acknowledged physical differences in that era, and Lloyd's quiet concealment of his injury became part of his mystique. He never mentioned the loss of his fingers, even in his 1928 autobiography, An American Comedy, believing that audiences should come to see his films for pure entertainment, not out of sympathy or curiosity. Many believe he concealed it, not just to protect his image, but to avoid being sidelined in a film industry, with little room for visibly different performers. Stories also hint that the glove itself became a closely guarded secret on set. Whether by strategy or survival instinct, Lloyd's perseverance didn't just preserve his career, it helped redefine the limits of on-screen physicality in a time when perfection was everything. Buster Keaton. In 1924, during the filming of Sherlock Jr., Buster Keaton was struck by a powerful gush of water from a water tower, slamming him onto a railroad track. The scene looked routine, but the impact fractured his neck, a fact he wouldn't discover until much later. After years of recurring headaches and stiffness, despite the injury, Keaton kept performing his own stunts, never publicly addressing the damage. Chronic pain and reduced mobility allegedly followed him for the rest of his life. Some film historians have speculated that his famously stoic expression, the so-called Great Stone Face, wasn't just a stylistic hallmark, but possibly a way to manage this discomfort without breaking character. By the 1930s, studio interference had stripped Keaton of his independence as a filmmaker, leading to 2 failed marriages, estrangement from his sons, and struggles with alcohol that nearly cost him his life. Stories suggest that Keaton's refusal to show pain wasn't just personal grit. It was part of a silent era code where suffering was expected but never spoken. According to biographer Rudy Blesch, Keaton simply did not complain, reinforcing the image of a performer whose body took the hits, but whose face never flinched. Claude Reigns. At 5 feet 6 inches and lacking conventional leading man looks, Claude Reigns seemed an unlikely candidate for movie stardom. Yet his rich, distinctive voice and commanding presence made him one of cinema's most memorable character actors, beginning with a role where his face was completely invisible. His film debut in The Invisible Man, 1933, was both ironic and perfect. Someone whose physical appearance had often worked against him became famous playing a character whose body couldn't be seen at all. The role relied entirely on his voice, which had been trained and refined through years of overcoming speech difficulties. Born into poverty in London's Clapham district, Reigns left school at age 11 to work and help support his family, later serving in World War I, where he was temporarily blinded by gas, experiences that gave him deep empathy for the downtrodden characters he would later portray. His relatively short stature meant he rarely played leading roles, but directors like Michael Curtis and Alfred Hitchcock recognized that Reigns could dominate a scene through pure acting ability. In films like Casablanca and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, he created complex villains who were neither wholly evil nor entirely sympathetic, characters whose flaws made them more human, not less. His approach to acting was methodical and intellectual, often spending hours analyzing his character's psychological motivations, bringing depth to supporting roles that sometimes overshadowed the leads. Reigns proved that physical limitations could be transcended through talent and determination, creating a career that spanned nearly 4 decades and included 4 Oscar nominations. Conrad Vite. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with sharp, angular features and an otherworldly presence, Conrad Vite appeared physically imposing, yet his career was shaped by profound vulnerability and moral courage that ran deeper than any superficial advantage his appearance might have provided. Born in Berlin in 1893, Vite initially seemed to embody certain ideals that would later be perverted by Nazi ideology, but his personal convictions placed him in direct opposition to the regime that might have celebrated his appearance. His breakout role as the somnambulist Cesare in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, a 1920, established him as a master of expressionist acting, using his tall, lean frame to create unforgettable characters that seemed to exist between the living and the departed. Vite's striking appearance masked someone of deep principle. Despite not being Jewish himself, he fled Nazi Germany in 1933 because his wife was Jewish, abandoning a successful career rather than compromise his values. This decision cost him enormously, forcing him to rebuild his career, first in Britain, then in Hollywood, where he ironically found his greatest success playing Nazi villains in films like Casablanca. His tall stature and distinctive features made him a natural for villainous roles, but those who knew him described a gentle, intellectual person who was tormented by having to portray the very evil he had fled. Vite donated his Hollywood earnings to the British war effort, using his success playing Nazis to fund the fight against them, a form of poetic justice that gave deeper meaning to every menacing performance. His physical presence was commanding, but his true strength lay in his moral courage and willingness to sacrifice career advancement for principle. Lon Chaney, known as the Person of 1,000 Faces, Lon Chaney revolutionized the art of screen transformation through makeup and physical performance, but his most profound inspiration came from an unexpected source. Born in 1883 to parents who were both hearing impaired in Colorado Springs, Chaney learned to communicate through facial expressions, pantomime, and sign language long before he ever stepped on a stage. His father, Frank, lost his hearing after contracting typhoid fever at age 4, while his mother, Emma, was born without hearing, making young Lon the family's primary interpreter with the hearing world from childhood. This unique upbringing gave Chaney an extraordinary ability to convey emotion without words, a skill that proved invaluable in the silent film era. Chaney's transformation techniques were legendary, often involving painful procedures that reshaped his face and body. For The Penalty, 1920, he convinced audiences he was a double amputee by strapping his legs behind him and walking on his knees. In The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1923, he wore a 40-pound hump that left him in agony. His willingness to endure physical pain for his art stemmed partly from his childhood understanding that some stories could only be told through the body's language, not its voice. Chaney's empathy for society's outcasts, often playing physically different or socially rejected characters, reflected his deep understanding of what it meant to be different, learned from growing up as a bridge between the hearing impaired and hearing worlds. His performances gave dignity to characters others might have portrayed as mere monsters, creating complex, sympathetic figures who revealed the humanity behind physical differences. He passed away in 1930 at age 47, but his legacy lived on through his son, Lon Chaney Jr., who carried the family name into the sound era. Chaney's greatest achievement was proving that true artistry came not from external appearances, but from the recognition of our shared humanity beneath the surface. Ernest Borgnine's nose didn't fit the Hollywood mold, and that was exactly what made it memorable. Flattened and broad, it became one of his most recognizable features. Some people suspect that years of Navy service from 1935 to 1941, and again after Pearl Harbor until 1945, may have contributed to its shape, though Borgnine never confirmed any specific incidents during his naval career. While the rumor stuck, adding a layer of authenticity to his already rugged image, there's no verified evidence of boxing-related injuries. In a city fixated on pristine aesthetics and refined style, his face offered something different: sincerity. Directors like Delbert Mann saw that edge as cinematic gold. Ernest's breakout role in Marty, a modest Bronx butcher with a soft heart, earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor in 1955. His unvarnished appearance wasn't a liability, it was the character. Despite his intimidating screen presence, Borgnine was known for his warmth and humor off-camera, often joking that what he lacked in classical handsomeness, he made up for in character and authenticity. Industry insiders often remarked on his ability to convey vulnerability through a hardened exterior, a contrast that became his trademark. Borgnine himself embraced the narrative, often joking about his looks and suggesting that what he lacked in classic beauty, he made up for in character. Insiders claimed that his face spoke volumes before he ever said a word. And in post-war America, that unspoken story resonated. Walter Brennan. By the time Walter Brennan shuffled into frame in The Westerner in 1940, his distinctive limp had already become part of his screen persona. The limp was not the result of a real injury, but was an acting choice that Brennan developed for his characters. Some sources incorrectly connected it to his World War I service, though that link remains unverified, and the limp was actually a performance technique rather than a physical challenge. Brennan did experience real wartime effects during World War I, including exposure to mustard gas that gave him his distinctive, raspy voice and cost him several teeth, physical changes that he later turned into career advantages rather than obstacles. Instead of this being a real impediment, Brennan's theatrical limp became a deliberate character trait, and Hollywood embraced it. Studios started casting him in roles that emphasized his weathered appearance and physical quirks, often depicting grizzled seniors despite Brennan being only in his 40s. His gravelly voice and uneven stride lent his characters a rugged authenticity that distinguished him in an industry still preoccupied with pristine heroes. Between 1936 and 1940, Brennan won 3 Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor, a record no other male actor has equaled. His third win for The Westerner solidified his status as a character actor who could dominate the frame with subtle physicality. Brennan's approach proved that perceived imperfections could become an actor's greatest strengths, inspiring other performers to embrace their unique characteristics rather than hide them. Several cinema experts proposed that his adopted limp served as a visual emblem of perseverance, symbolizing characters who had weathered life's hardships and pressed on. And while Hollywood scarcely applauded imperfection, Brennan's success illuminated an unspoken reality. Sometimes flaws, even artificial ones, made a performance indelible. Anecdotes even suggest that directors started crafting roles with his gait in mind, letting his walk speak volumes before any dialogue was delivered. Peter Lorre. In 1931, Peter Lorre stunned German audiences with his breakout role in Fritz Lang's M, portraying a tormented individual responsible for terrible crimes. The performance was unforgettable, but so was his face. Lorre's naturally prominent eyes, often mistaken for a medical condition, became his trademark. While some speculated he had exophthalmos, no diagnosis was ever confirmed. As a Jewish actor, Lorre fled Nazi Germany in 1933, leaving behind a promising career and arriving in Hollywood as a refugee who had to rebuild his life from nothing. speaking limited English and relying on his distinctive appearance to communicate what words could not. His intense gaze, paired with a soft, accented voice, gave him an edge that Hollywood couldn't ignore. By 1934, Lorre had arrived in the United States, and studios quickly began casting him in roles that leaned into his eerie visual appeal. From the slippery Ugarte in Casablanca to the jittery Dr. Einstein in Arsenic and Old Lace, he was frequently typecast as unstable outsiders. Lorre's experience as an exile gave depth to his portrayals of desperate, displaced characters, as he understood firsthand the fear and vulnerability of being an outsider in an unwelcoming world. Directors didn't just use his look, they built entire moods around it. Biographers have hinted that Lorre may have been self-conscious about his appearance, especially in an industry obsessed with conventional beauty. Some dare to guess that this inner conflict added fuel to his performances, layering menace with vulnerability. Whether true or not, the possibility adds a haunting dimension to his legacy. Throughout the 1940s and 50s, Lorre became a staple of noir and suspense films, his face instantly recognizable, even in silhouette. In an era that often sidelined those who didn't conform to the leading actor archetype, Peter Lorre carved out a space that was entirely his own, one unforgettable stare at a time. Victor McLaglin. Victor McLaglin built his film legacy on brute force and battered features. At age 14, McLaglin ran away from home to join the British Army, hoping to fight in the Boer War, though his father managed to secure his release when his true age was discovered. Before Hollywood, he boxed professionally, racking up dozens of fights, and, according to some accounts, even sparring with future heavyweight champion Jack Johnson in a 1909 exhibition. Whether myth or memory, the story stuck, much like the damage to McLaglin's face. His cauliflower ear and visibly weathered features weren't hidden. They became trademarks. Unlike contemporaries who sought cosmetic polish, McLaglin kept the scars. His refusal to conform to Hollywood's beauty standards was partly practical, the damage was too extensive to hide, and partly philosophical. As he believed, his face told the story of a life fully lived. Directors like John Ford capitalized on his raw presence, casting him in roles that demanded more grit than glamour. By the early 1930s, McLaglin had transitioned from silent films to sound pictures with ease, often portraying soldiers, ex-cons, or hardened individuals with haunted pasts. In 1935, he won the Academy Award for Best Actor for The Informer, playing a tormented Irish rebel. Some critics argued that it wasn't just his acting. It was the life etched into his face that made the role believable. Rumors swirled that McLaglin's refusal to alter his appearance wasn't stubbornness, but strategy. In an industry obsessed with symmetry, he stood out by doing the opposite. That face wasn't studio approved. It was earned. Jack Elam. A pencil jab to the eye might seem like a career-ending injury, but for Jack Elam, it became his calling card. The damage occurred during childhood at age 11, during a Boy Scout meeting, leaving him with a permanently misaligned left eye. In an era when Hollywood prized symmetrical beauty, Elam's look should have been a liability. Instead, it turned him into one of the most recognizable faces in Western cinema. Despite his menacing screen presence, Elam was known among colleagues for his gentle nature and self-deprecating humor, often joking about his appearance and putting nervous co-stars at ease during tense scenes. Before acting, he worked as an accountant and studio manager, even tallying books for Samuel Goldwyn. But by the late 1940s, he transitioned into acting, debuting in She Said No in 1949. Over the next 2 decades, Elam racked up roles in more than 60 films, often cast as twitchy gunslinger, crooked deputies, or unpredictable outlaws. His unsettling stare made him a natural villain, so much so that he once quipped he couldn't walk into a scene without pulling a weapon. In his final years, Elam lived quietly in Ashland, Oregon, tending to his garden and reflecting on a career that transformed what many would consider a challenge into his greatest asset. Films like High Noon and Support Your Local Sheriff cemented his legacy. What many saw as a flaw became a defining trait. And for Jack Elam, the eye that wandered never stopped catching attention. These Hollywood legends remind us that true stardom isn't about perfection, it's about authenticity. They turned their challenges into calling cards, their differences into distinctions. In today's world of digital touch-ups and impossible standards, perhaps we can learn something from these golden age icons who prove that what makes you different just might make you unforgettable.